That's great. Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks. I've just asked Nilgün to help figure out how many zeros are in 100,000 trillion. I'm pretty good at from 1 to 100, so which is zeros in 100,000 trillion, which you mentioned. So we'll figure out how many zeros that actually. Really? Just? Anyway, it's fascinating to hear that it kind of goes beyond the limits, I think, of our imagination in multiple respects. Thank you very much. And data, I think, in the era of SDGs is going to be one of the key currencies for us to actually be able to make sense of development, of measurement, of understanding where we start from, where we're going. It's a very critical piece. Thank you in that context also for the invitation to partner with UNDP. We had just for the information of the rest of the audience, we had a good discussion just before this panel with a group of colleagues from all the different regions of UNDP on how to take this forward. Many of the areas that you mentioned in here are very similar to our areas of work. So I'm sure as you did your work planning, you looked at some of our documents to have an immediate match. So there's a lot of ways of working together, I believe, going forward, and we need to explore that in a bit more detail with colleagues, which we will do in the coming weeks and months. So thanks again, Stephen, for joining us and for the offer. Colleagues, we've heard 6 different perspectives, if you wish. We heard from Pia and from Nino from a national perspective, one on data, and Pia in the beginning more framing the issue of experimental and evidence-based policy making. And then we heard from Alexandre and from Angela on kind of an international perspective, if you wish, innovation in the context of an international body in an international setting. Umut led us from there into Nilüfer Municipality, much closer to a real warm human body and what that actually means in terms of change, in terms of impact. So I think we covered the full spectrum. There's hardly any level that we didn't cover in trying to bring some sense to the question of, is there a dichotomy, is there a binary kind of situation between the two? Are they mutually reinforcing each other? Are they dependent on each other? Is it 50 shades of gray or black and white? I think we have a good sense of what that actually is. And it is evidence follows experimentation, follows evidence, follows experimentation. I think it's dependent on the issue, it's dependent on the points. And we heard that several times from colleagues, I guess in various ways reiterated, underpinned all of it by the key element of data. Now, let me open up. I think we still have a bit of time, and I hope I will be reminded when we run out of time. What's your sense? Oh, and Pia is back live with us in superhuman size. Good to have you, Pia. Thanks for your patience. Let me open it up. Colleagues, any questions, comments, thoughts from listening to this? Does it make sense? How many zeros does it have? Is it really 17? I'm not sure. I'm not going to back to differ. Any views? Let me give the floor here to the colleague.
Yeah, I have a question for Alexandre. You have worked on European Commission, right? And my question is, I have seen a chart today, and it was about policy change and technology change. So how do you assume that policy change can catch the technology change or not?
See collaboration between international organizations. You know, to be quite honest, I think policy change will always try to catch up with technological change, but it will always be too slow. I think one of the facets that Angela said, anticipatory innovation, anticipation, you know, trying to foresight, horizon scanning, try to put as much effort as we can in future approaches. I think right now with the fast pace of technological change, it's the only way that policy organizations will ever be able to deal with technological change. Unless we start regulating like crazy, unless we start blocking like crazy, that will be a different discussion that I don't think it's our remit here. But again, futures, anticipation, work as much as possible with stakeholders on the ground and try to understand what's happening. I think from more often than not, policymakers are too up in the ivory tower They don't really have the feeling of what's happening on the technological ground.
Great, thanks, Alexandre. Pia, I see you waving. Just for you to be aware, when you shake your heads or when you open your eyes, everybody in the room will fully notice it. But
Sorry.
I did see your hand waving, so over to you. I guess you had a comment right on the same question.
Yes, if you don't mind, and I'm very sorry, but about the size of my hand being bigger than the other panelists. I think this is a very important question, and this is why having technologists involved in policymaking actually dramatically helps this situation. When you have technologists involved in process of policy and you start to bridge the gap between policy and implementation, you have a better chance of having values-driven policy. You have a better chance of policy being more responsive to change and more able to help shape things, because I don't think we want to be entirely shaped by technology. Now, I am a geek, a lifelong technologist. I love technology, but the notion that technology on its own will solve all of our problems ignores the fact that we are humans first, and that actually we should be shaping our future based on our values, based on what we care about, based on the sort of future that we want to have, not just on what technology can provide us. So I believe that policy, the very concept of policy as setting a direction, a values-based direction for society, it shouldn't just be policy reacting to technology. It should be technology reacting to policy. And when the two are hand in hand, we have a chance, a very good chance, of shaping and implementing a better future.
Great, thanks a lot, Pia. I think it's a good point, which we didn't really have so clearly on the table as yet, or this interlinkage with and the influence of technology in the way you just put it. I moved to the back of the room also to see that I'm not missing any raising of eyebrows here in the back. Anybody from here who would like to come in, comment on it, and also questions. Certainly to me, not all of this is very clear, so I would have multiple questions, but I'm moderating already, so I'm disguised, if you wish. Questions, comments? If not the case, that's...
I think Pia again has one more.
Yeah, you have to wait 1 second. I think we have one comment from here. Please.
Hi, thank you all. This has been really fascinating. So what's on my mind is really a better understanding on, sort of the level of confidence we need to have in data in order to take action. And I'd love to hear everyone comment on that, because I think one thing is sort of gaining insights and understanding, and another thing is taking action, whether it's policy or executing a contract. So I'd love to hear people comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. 100,000 trillion data bytes, of course, need to go through quite a process before you trust in any one of the trillions. Comments from the podium on this, on confidence in data?
I can say something about taking the action, actually.
Maybe yes, Umut and then Nino and Stephen. But let's try to keep it brief so that we can then also go back to Pia for her follow-up question.
Actually, I really agree about taking action, because you can make a lot of policies, you can plan a lot of stuff, but taking the action is the real courage. And that's what we do in local level. That's what we try to do. Actually, well, I said that our citizens are happy. Of course, we have happy citizens, or unhappy citizens, we're everybody. But when we take the action, they see it. And that's why we are, our municipality is kind of famous, because we take the action, we ask citizens, and we make them, we include them, we provide their participation, and we take the action. That is the important stuff.
Thanks, Umut. In fact, in your presentation, you made that point of trust, as a key part of the participatory approach you're pursuing. Yeah. Thank you. Nino.
Yeah, there are many questions. Administrative data has many shortcomings. It is very messy. It is collected for absolutely other purposes. It's collected for case processing, right? It's not collecting for analysis. But despite these quality shortcomings, well, there are differences. Some databases, some data systems are much better structured and much better collected. Some organizations say border crossing data should be collected very carefully, and because it's important, every person has to be checked, their passport has to be checked, so it's a better data that we can kind of fully trust. And then there's data which, I don't know, Ministry of Education collects from the universities about the students, less personalized, less. So there are different quality data, but any data is good for trend analysis. It is important to understand the quality and how the data has been collected, to understand all the business processes that take place, who collects, where it is stored, so that we do not make a false and wrong judgment using this data. As I said, in our system, we have different databases collected, integrated, and we have different trust in different databases, and we would give different weight to each of them. But it doesn't mean that those which have relatively bad quality are not worth analyzing, because they also open up new issues that we maybe were not thinking about before. And again, if we use that data that has a lot of shortcomings, and we go back to the agency and say, this is very good, but here we have problems, this is more evidence, if you want, or more increases the motivation of the organization to collect better, to pay more attention to the quality aspect.
Thank you, Nino. Stephen.
On the technological, the hardware side, believe me, these things cost 200 million each, and you can imagine we test quite rigorously the satellites.
Oh, the satellites. Okay.
They're in that range, and you can imagine that we actually do test ultra rigorously the technology before it's launched. We actually build 2 satellites. One is just for testing acoustic, thermal, and electromagnetic testing. They're ultra stable measuring machines, and we know exactly the sort of technical performances of the space side. On the data and the information that's extracted from the data, we've had a 15-year program of development work to actually produce all of the information products and services, and we put a lot of emphasis on standards and quality. So again, on the information products, we know exactly under what circumstances they can be produced, to what accuracies, what limitations, what performances and what constraints. And at the moment, it's a bit of a confusing world out there, because there are quite a few organizations entering into the game, private sector, and there are quite a few claims being made, and it's a bit of a bewildering time for somebody to try and get into this technology, which is why World Bank and ADB have signed a collaboration with ESA, because we're not in business, but we do actually develop the technology, and we can act as a sort of impartial, independent technical authority on what this thing can deliver.
Great. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Angela, you would like to comment?
One more really quick response to that, the level of confidence. I think it depends on what question you're trying to answer. If you're trying to prove a hypothesis right or wrong, or justify spending of $200 million on something, it's very important to make sure that your relationship between cause and effect is clear. When dealing with systems with more complexity, it's more complicated, right? Are you trying to prove something, or are you trying to explore something and understand a pattern of interaction over time? It's a bit more difficult to measure and put standard deviation around. And oftentimes when we're trying to measure in a complex system, measuring for the average is less interesting than measuring for the outlier and measuring for the things that are changing most rapidly, which sometimes can be easy to miss. if you're only going for averages. So I think it depends really on the question that's being answered, and that speaks to the role for both evidence and experimentation in that.
Thanks very much, Angela. I think the question as it came, if I understood it correctly, also has an even more far-reaching dimension to it, which is to do with the personal confidence in the quality of data and the use of data, the analytics around it, and the individual comfort with data. That's going to go far beyond what we can discuss in this session, but I think it's one a question that is with us for quite some time now, and will also move with us into the coffee break. We have about 5 minutes left. If I don't see any other question from here, I would perhaps, we have Gonzalo with one question. Who? And Millie? Yes, I was about to give Pia the closing word, as she also had the opening word. And I think that's just commensurate to her overall presence in the room. So we have briefly Gonzalo, and then we'll see whether it requires answers from the panel, and then we'll give the word to Pia.
Yeah, just following up on the question of trust in data. Usually problems, and this particularly relates to when making decisions, development problems are complex, multidimensional, and therefore data will either support several strings, several possible decisions, and to which you will have to then deal with either trade-offs or synergies in issues. So I would ask anyone in the panel if you have any thoughts on when you have now massive flooding of data coming to you, how you actually deal with synergies and trade-offs and coming up with a final decision about what to do.
Thanks, Gonzalo. That's very much around data analytics. Any volunteer from the panel on a tricky question, difficult question? Gonzalo, the kind of trade-offs you're referring to, what exactly do you mean?
For a city, you're never dealing with just one problem or one target, one goal in terms of the development of your city. You might have several ones on the table. And so which one to put your money on, or how much you put to each side, the data will be supporting positive or negative decisions to many of the options that you have on the table. Mm-hmm. So how do you, and as more and more data becomes available, more and more choices will become apparent. So how do you deal with that new reality?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Gonzalo. In my layman's perception, I would say be clear on what you're asking for in the beginning. I mean, be clear on what the question is that you're seeking answers for with the data. But that's a layman's perspective. We have experts on the panel. Stephen.
I can make just one comment. That actually is what's behind what I call the higher level information products, some of which you saw on the screen there, because what we do actually is reduce the trillions of zeros successively down to types of information that support different needs. But the very top of the pyramid is something that you can get on one piece of paper, you can put in front of a minister, and you can make a decision. And that's the whole sort of chain of using this type of information and reducing it down to the sorts of information products that we've been dealing with. And when I said we put a lot of emphasis on standards and quality, what I meant by that is we want to be sure if you're dealing with big decisions and huge environmental problems, we think you should be using reliable environmental information of known quality, which is why we go through a long development cycle to ensure that we know the technical performances and constraints on what we're delivering.
Great, thanks a lot, Stephen. Pia, you have been patiently waiting, but wanted to come in. Please, over to you.
I'm not sure I ever patiently wait, actually. I have two final points which actually speak to the comments just made. The first one is, and this may sound odd to some people, given they have a long history with data and advocating for studies of data. I have a healthy skepticism of data at all times. And the reason for that is data is often framed by the context it was collected. Data is often political or the result of a political process. I actually digitized 130 years of census data, and it was a fascinating experience. But there is also this notion that I trust in measurable results. I trust in the measurement of the change that I can see. I've seen many projects where the data scientists and the economists have built beautiful models, and then when it comes to the implementation, the outcomes are entirely different. And the attitude is one of, well, our models were fine, and obviously it was the people that was the problem. And I feel like we need to get away from admiring the problem and taking our time to try to come up with the previous question talked about the final decision. And I think we need to adopt a sense of urgency. People are suffering. We can't be content to admire the problem. We can't be content to try to get the perfect data models. We must act. We must involve people in the design of better solutions and better futures, which means constantly taking all of these approaches simultaneously, measuring, monitoring, using what data we have, creating better data, but realizing that data can lead us to the problem. Data will not always give us a solution. And it is people, it is in engaging with people that we can actually create more sustainable outcomes for them, for themselves.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Pia, and for addressing this issue also of context and how should I say, how data is being generated as it relates then also to confidence in data. The coffee gates will open in a second. In terms of, they're not going to be open. You see, I'm very responsive to any sign I get from Millie. I'm immediately thinking the coffee is cold or there's no sugar or something else. We will have a coffee in a moment. In terms of wrapping up, let me not go back into repeating the points that we've made in the course of this discussion, but we opened the discussion around the question of whether or not there's a tension between experimental and experimentation-based policy making and evidence-based policy making, and what is that tension? My take on it, beyond now hearing all the colleagues speaking to it from different levels, from national, local, and international, and out of space levels, there is a certain tension, obviously, but it's not a tension in the ideological sense of you got to do it this way or that way. I think what we have heard clearly from everyone is that evidence and experimentation reinforce each other, depend on each other, are going hand in hand depending on the situation and depending on the context. They need tailor-made approaches. That's what I take from it as well. But certainly that's also an element of where subjective influence into a process comes in, which then, is again subject to debate. So it's not a question that gets an ultimate answer in a session like this, but I hope it helped move the debate and dialogues that I heard in coffee breaks and in the context of the zones of experimentations from a lot of colleagues to a different level, and offers a number of additional insights for us all to make up our minds themselves on the level of tension between the two approaches. On that note, we'll close, and Millie is not stopping me from saying there will be coffee outside. Oh no, first Millie will say something to you.
The round of applause for the panel. Sorry for waving at you. I just didn't want you sending everybody to the coffee before. One more thing. Could we get the slide, please, on the... There we go. Okay, so ticket for coffee. Please log in. The Wi-Fi should work, both of them, depending on where you sit. Should. We have 4 or 5 quick questions for you guys. Again, it was incredibly useful that you all logged in yesterday. It really allowed for quite a rich analysis of what you felt are the risks and concerns and opportunities and excitements from what you've heard yesterday. It really does provide a little bit of a layer of political economy within which a lot of the work that will happen after the event will be situated. So please log in and give us a sense of what your take is from the 2 zones of experiments as well as the panel today. You guys as well, please.
Can I say one thing? Well, I will have to leave at the moment to catch my ferry. So if anybody wants to talk to me, please contact me and take my contact info from Isabel, and I would be appreciated. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much to the panel. We're normal citizens again.
Assuming that everybody who has stood up has filled out the big brain questions. Indy's at the door checking it.